Welcome. I'm your host, Malcolm Gallagher. From our BizVision studios in the UK, you're watching the BBTV Conscious Matters channel. Now, there have been many changes in businesses last year, and someone said 10 years of them in just 10 months. And those changes have given rise to many new memes such as remote leadership, virtual selling. But all of them that we are most excited about at BTV is the emergence and the acclaim of conscious leadership. The conscious agenda of planet, people, and profits is applauded by generations such as the millennials, and they are the emerging new leaders, both male and female. So, is the old traditional male boss leader finally leaving us? And if so, what place will conscious leadership play in successful leadership? It's a big question that needs careful understanding, because this is not just the future of a business, but also your own personal future. What will the person at the top look like, act like? I need expert input for you. So I'm taking you to meet the co-author of this book, Reinventing Masculinity, and co-founder of the Teal team. Welcome, Ed Frauenheim. Welcome, Ed.
Thanks very much, Malcolm. Great to be here with you.
It's good. Now, I don't want you bragging anymore about the fact that I'm in the cold northeast of England with the snow all around there and it's dark and you're sitting in the warmth of San Francisco.
That is the case. Yes, it's sunny and lovely here. So I'm hoping it gets better for you over time.
Well, let's hope this, socially distant. Okay, let's get into it. Ed, I'm delighted that you're kindly guesting on the BBTV Conscious Matters show. Now, viewers, in this BBTV talk show, I'll be chatting to Ed in three parts: the past, the change, the future. First part, I'll chat to him about the traditional male boss and what he means about confined masculinity. Surely it's nothing to do with tight trousers, is it? Part two.
Usually not, yeah.
Yes. Part two, we'll move to talking about what changes have happened and are happening, and by who? Millennials that are demanding what he calls reinventing masculinity. And in part three, we'll talk about the future, which we think is here now. We call it conscious leadership. What are these success skills that are needed? But Ed, before we go into our three-part chat, please briefly introduce yourself to my viewers and listeners. Who is Ed? What drives you? And what's your leadership philosophy?
Thanks, Malcolm. Again, great to be here. I am a writer, primarily, if you think about a single professional identity. I've been a journalist and then a corporate researcher and writer for about 30 years. I was a newspaper journalist for some time, and most recently was a senior director of content at Great Place to Work, the global authority on workplace culture behind the Fortune 100 Best Companies to Work For list is maybe what we're best known for. Recently left that, and I'm pursuing consulting and speaking workshops around a better masculinity at work, and also this notion of teal cultures, which is to say more soulful cultures, more conscious cultures and organizations that I really think are the future. So also I'm a husband, a father of two kids. That's part of being a man in yes. My identity. And they're in the next rooms doing their distance learning right now here in San Francisco. So that kind of rounds out who I am as a person. And I could say more about this leadership philosophy, but I think the gist of it is we really do have to move away from the barking boss, the stoic, cold fella that is kind of sending directions down to everybody, and really move toward a warmer, connected, empathetic, and collaborative leader in the future.
Excellent. I'm looking forward to chatting to you about that. Let's kick off our talk in part one by talking about that traditional male boss and what you mean again about confined masculinity, and also the three roles men are permitted to be. There must have been some value at some times at being in the traditional male boss, surely.
Sure. Yes, there has been, especially in the earlier stages of our economy. When we say we're in the midst of a shift is from confined masculinity to something we call liberating masculinity. And the confined masculinity, as you said, kind of limits men both in terms of the roles they can play as well as the ways they can relate to others. And this has been around for, we think, several thousand years, not the entirety of human existence, because there's a lot of time during the hunter-gatherer stage where this wasn't necessarily the case. But since civilization, in a lot of ways, these have been a traditional masculine identity around the world. And those three main roles that we identified, that other scholars have seen as well, are the protector, the provider, and the conqueror. And as you said, Malcolm, in a lot of ways, those have served men in a capitalist economy where we're out to sort of protect for our families, be able to, create children and provide for them as fathers. That provider figure is trying to amass wealth, in our as leaders of our companies, but also again in a personal way. And that conqueror figure is out there to try to beat the competition, be the king on the top of the hill. And in some ways, those, could be successful in a time of more of an industrial economy, when we are out to just about, amassing wealth and not necessarily thinking more broadly about society. And I think I'll also mention that these relation options for men have been limited too. Those tended to be, you're supposed to be dominant, related to that conqueror role. You're supposed to be aggressive, competitive, and not show a lot of emotion. Vulnerability, whether emotionally or in terms of, not being super strong or failing in some respect, was a real sign of weakness that was to be avoided. And there's also the notion that we are isolated. We're self-made men, right? And so we see ourselves as distinct and discrete and needing to be self-sufficient. And so, in terms of what that led to in terms of leadership, is that you would have bosses that were feeling like they had to be the ones telling people what to do, in control. And in some ways, when it's, an industrial economy and you're just having people that are doing very almost mindless tasks, that doesn't, necessarily cause a lot of problems for a business. Maybe there can be some benefits of everybody following the chain of command. Yeah, it's less clear that works as the economy has changed.
I must admit, when I first looked at a phrase, confined masculinity, putting apart the tight trousers, I thought, let me just understand this a little bit, because we've embraced the conscious agenda here. I'm very proud that I work with my wife. I'm very proud that I work for my wife. Let's get this right, But we're equals. We're equals. We're equals. And I've worked in companies in the past, but a long time in the past there, that had that top-down approach. Almost like we'll send the tablets down from Moses, and you will do as you're told and everything. Now, suddenly, these leaders just don't work. It doesn't work for them because they don't understand remote leadership, for example. They've got no empathy with the people. Are you feeling that as well?
Yeah. And to your point that you began the show with, like 10 years of change happened in 10 months, these ways of working where we're required to trust each other more, because people are working at home. We can't look over their shoulder in the office, or we have to develop a sense of empathy, as you put it, to create psychological safety. This phrase that we now know is well researched, that to get the best out of your team, you must create an environment where people feel safe, that they're not going to be mocked, that they can bring their full selves and their vulnerabilities. If you're someone who's a barking leader, a barking boss, or someone who never expresses your own vulnerability, you're not going to, engender that sense of a community, a team where, we can kind of acknowledge our troubles, such that we can then, move past them and do good work together. So, and I think maybe you've talked about this on your show, but this is not a soft, nice to have. This is critical these days. Like Google and others have done research that the most effective teams are not the ones necessarily that have the most PhDs or the highest IQs or the best pedigrees from, prestigious schools. It's the ones where they got the safety, so that you're creating this kind of the chemistry and the support of each other to really thrive. And to your point, if you're the kind of a boss that was bringing that old school way, the general that's pretty cold, it's not going to thrive. Your company's not going to thrive.
No, I totally agree that what was really interesting the other day, I read somewhere, Ed, when I read all these things, and I can't give you the right reference, but I read that businesses are wasting 30% of productivity at this moment in time because of this organizational imbalance there, that the old traditional command and downwards approach that which is frightening amount, isn't it? 30% of productivity.
I could see it being more than that even, Malcolm. Wow. Honestly, when you think about how much people are zombies at work.
Yeah.
And the research from Gallup and Great Place to Work for that matter shows that a third of people maybe are having this sense of engagement at work. And it's edged up a little bit, but that means 70% of people are not bringing their full efforts and human creativity to their work. So I really think that old school, and that maybe that was not awful in the time of making widgets on an assembly line, but you can't have that in today's economy where, ironically, as we gotten more artificial intelligence, we need people to show up as human beings more than ever.
Yeah.
To show their creativity, their compassion for customers, their ability to connect and solve problems collectively. These are these human qualities. In some ways, that we're in a more human economy than ever. This is what the thinker Dov Seidman has talked about. So I think the 30%. I'm not surprised. I think it could even be higher that we're wasting in terms of the way we set up organizations.
Hey, 30% is frightening enough, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah, I just want to go back into this book again because I'm enjoying it, and normally I skim read, because we've got so much going on here, but I'm actually dipping in, and I've got to applaud the way you've written it, because I like the fact that at the end of each chapter, you do a nice summary, things to ponder and do. Now, I like that. And it follows through the 5 C's, doesn't it? And again, you've got the compassion element to it. So I want to applaud you on the way it's written. It's a really easy read to make you think. And just before we move on to part 2, I'll just remind viewers and listeners of your website URL, which is all the W's, reinventingmasculinity.com. Now, Obviously, viewers, you can see it on the screen behind me, but for listeners, let me just do that again so you can write it down. It's all the W's reinventingmasculinity.com. I'm really enjoying this book, Ed. I really am.
Thank you, Malcolm.
And it's going to take me a little while longer to get through mine because I'm a slow reader, but I am digesting it. So, part 2.
Wonderful.
Let's move to talking about what changes have happened and are happening, and by whom. Millennials, for example. All this is demanding what you call reinventing masculinity. So what's your thinking? Oh, and where does the gender agenda fit in? As here at BVTV, we see growth in women leadership as vital in this new altered world.
Sure. Yeah, I can address that gender issue as part of what we see as the change underway. We you mentioned the 5 C's, those are kind of our steps to reinvent your masculinity. We have 3 F's for the change underway that I like alliteration and these little mnemonics, but I believe, and my co-author Ed Adams believe that there's a faster, flatter, fairness-focused work world that's emerging. And by those 3 F's, I mean this, that the world is faster in the sense of business change is quicker. Yeah. We've got digital disruption that you could be facing competitors arising anywhere in the world because they can create an app and build on an existing infrastructure. That relates to the second one around flatter, because organizations are realizing that the top-down chain of command is too slow. You can't wait for someone to pick up a signal on the front line, send it through a chain of command, have the general CEO figure out what to do and then send it back a direction back down to the front. By that time, you've missed an opportunity or you've been attacked by a threat. You need to let everybody throughout the organization sense and respond to what's happening. Use their ingenuity, their creativity, their empathy to move in a quicker way, almost like a flock of birds moves. We use that analogy in the book. And so that is that flatter piece. And so again, you can't really be that traditional guy leader if you're going to be moving in this flatter world. And that last piece speaks to the gender agenda you mentioned, Malcolm, the fairness focused. We're now in the post or the continuing Me Too world where women have spoken up and refused to be subject to harassment at work, to abuse in the wake of Harvey Weinstein and other awful treatment by men. And we're also in the wake of the Black Lives Matter protests, in the wake of George Floyd's killing. Well, there's a greater sensitivity than ever to ways in which underprivileged folks have been mistreated, we have lacked the ability to tap their potential as a result too. So the fairness piece is actually also about performance. So in this world that's faster, flatter, and more fairness focused, it's calling for a different way for men to show up. And we make this, to kind of sum it up, we say that in the older way of being a man that can find masculinity, you end up being rigid, cold, and isolated in a world that's now calling for agility, warmth, and connection.
Yeah. And I suppose as well, Ed, in those old days, and I was in them, at my age there, I had to dress accordingly. It used to be, IBM used to have the blue suit. And if you didn't have the blue suit, you were cloned. You were cloned. You weren't allowed to express your individuality, your creativity. And, you became, in other words, Malcolm 1, Malcolm 2, Malcolm 3, and so on. Now you can be you, can't you? This must release greater opportunities for the world.
I think that's very true. I love that analogy and the cloned company man, if you will. And I think that's, getting back to your question about who's pushing things, my hat's off to millennials. I'm more of a Gen Xer myself, but I think that push for individuality to be yourself is coming in large part from younger people, from the millennial generation, and then Gen Z behind them, saying, you know what, we're not going to go for this bargain of us being company people, company men, company women, in exchange for stability at work, because that bargain fell apart. Companies really kind of said, we're not going to give you loyalty. We're going to lay you off at the drop of a hat. As many, restructurings took place in the 90s and earlier too. So that there's that call for individuality, and the companies that most provide that are the ones that are doing well. Otherwise they're attracting the creative people, the most creative people, the ones that are able to then bring their kind of human spark to what they do.
Yeah, totally. I do like your thinking, and hey, don't forget us baby boomers are still included as well. We're keen. Okay, thanks. Now for part 3, let's talk about the future, which we here at BVTV and BizVision, we think it's here now. We call it conscious leadership. What are the soft skills needed by reinvented leaders? Where should we be cautious, especially in developing a democratic, purpose-driven workplace with the challenge of this new hybrid way of working?
Great questions, Malcolm. To take that first piece, these skills that I say, and I love your conscious leadership terminology, and we talk about the importance of a more conscious masculinity, essentially, in our book as well. But I think a couple of the skills that we identified at Great Place to Work in our research, for example, is we'd studied leaders. We did a research project looking at 10,000 managers and found that the most effective ones, the most productive ones, were also the ones that were the most inclusive. We called them for all leaders because they brought 90+% of their people had a great experience in their jobs under these folks. And they had qualities such as these. They were very purpose-driven. They were not necessarily focused on the next quarterly results or the profits, but really the bigger picture. They created bonds of trust So very much focused on relationships and creating that psychological safety we talked about. They also were very humble, quite willing to sit back and let others take the credit and shine in the spotlight. So these characteristics are almost the opposite of what you had in the old days, right? Where you're going to be the hero guy, the man of steel, as the leader, who's not going to worry too much about purpose. We're going to get our numbers in, right? And whether or not, it doesn't matter whether we have good relationships. I just want to see you deliver. But that's not really going to be the future of leadership, I don't think. So those are some of the key skills that we see. And I would add, to your point about consciousness, this isn't something we talk about a Great Place to Work as much, but when we talk about this idea of a teal organization, it's really about a consciousness that we are all connected, that humanity has got to have this sense of mutual obligation to each other, and that we are part of a planet that could lose its sense of, its ability to sustain life if we aren't careful. So I would add that's a piece of the puzzle as well, that sense of consciousness.
Brilliant. Yeah. I just want to remind people again of the book. I really do. And I genuinely mean this, Ed, that this should be on every man's bookcase who wants to be one of the new leaders that is so necessary in this world. Across the world, leaders are awakening to necessary change in themselves, not just their business or their teams. Now, some are perplexed, confused, even resistant to change, but many are keen to know what to do. I trust that my conversation with Ed Frauenheim has made you think and hopefully act. Don't keep his thinking to yourself. Share it with others. Thanks, Ed, for a great interview.
Thank you so much, Malcolm.